Okay, so 3.5, we're going to talk about transformations and graphs of graphs. So there's a lot of different functions we can look at, but we're going to talk about different transformations we can do. Now, in this case, I am going to be using the parent function of, say, x squared. So here's all the different things I can do to change basically the shape and position of a graph of an x squared. Now, if you look at the basic x squared, it is a horseshoe looking shape. We call that a parabola. Okay? So, that's what we're starting with. Now, I'm going to erase all this. I'm going to just I already have everything on here, and I'm going to list how those change our graph. So the first one we're going to start with is this K. This K is a vertical shift up or down K units. H is going to be a horizontal shift. That is left or right H units. And it's important, I have the negative sign there because it goes the opposite direction of sine of K, or excuse me, H. Okay? So if H is negative, we go to the left, or excuse me, to the right, and if H is positive, we go to the left. Okay? So for example, let me pull up a graph here. Okay? So let's say I have f of x is x squared plus 4. So our parent function looks like kind of like that. So if I move up 4 units, it's going to look like that. Okay? If I have, say, we'll do it in the same color, f of x equals x minus 2 squared. That's going from the original position. We're going to go to the right 2 because it's the opposite direction. So we end up here. And it looks like that. Everything just shifts to the right. Now if I have two movements, say I have f of x is x plus 3 squared minus 5. So it means we go down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To the left 3. So our vertex is there. So it looks kind of like that. Okay, so there's vertical and horizontal shifts. Now we have, when we go back to the original page, you see we have this A and B here. We'll talk about that later. Let's talk about this negative sign. What's that going to do? Okay, a negative sign out front flips the graph. There's two ways of thinking about that. If we have negative f of x, this is just a little side note, this flips graph over the x-axis. Okay, so two ways to think about it. This one just means flips over itself, and this one is flips over the x-axis. So let's look at that. Let's say I have f of x is, say, negative x plus 3 squared minus 2. Two ways of thinking about this. Let me pull up a graph here. Okay, so I got my x-axis and my y-axis. Okay, the original looks like this. That's f of x. Or that's just your parent function. That's x squared. Okay? So first off, if I think about just moving it first and then flipping it, that's just flipping over itself. So we'll call this one the blue one. So that means we go down 2 to the left 3, and we're there. And the negative sign means it just flips over itself, so it looks like that. Okay? Now, if I rearrange this guy, knowing that if I make everything negative, it flips over the x-axis, well, that would be looking like this. Let's do it in red. If I factor out a negative sign, it's going to look like that. Okay, so then I can make the new movements, which is going to be up 2 over 3. So I'm here, and it looks like that. But when I flip it over the x-axis, it ends up in the same position. So just two ways of thinking about it. I just like to say, make your movements, and then if there's a negative sign out front, then just flip it over itself. Okay, and our very last thing is if we're multiplied by numbers. And you saw it on that original one. You can go back and look at it. But there's two possibilities. Let's see, let me write it again. I'll just leave all the other stuff off. That's the two ones we're worried about. Okay, so first one. The A is going to give us a vertical stretch or shrink. If A is greater than 1, it's a stretch. And if A is between 0 and 1, it's a shrink. Okay, now the B is a little different. It's a horizontal stretch or shrink. But the thing is on the horizontal, a stretch in the horizontal direction is the same thing as a shrink in the vertical direction, and vice versa. A shrink in the horizontal direction is the same thing as a stretch in the vertical direction. So they basically are the exact same thing. You just got to think about what direction you're talking about. So if B is greater than 1, it's a shrink horizontally. And if B is between 0 and 1, it's a stretch horizontally. Now, I don't want you to try to get too serious about how to draw those. Let's just give you an example of what you might see on a test. Let's say I have f of x equals negative 3 times 1/2 x minus 2 squared plus 5. And I want you to describe all the transformations. So just work our way down the list. So our first transformation is this guy here is going to make it go up 5. Okay. This here is going to make it go to the right 2. Okay. Then I'm going to leave the flip for last. We'll leave that one for last. Let's say we go to this guy, the 3. That's going to be a vertical stretch, because it's greater than 1, by 3. And then we have this dude here, the 1/2. So that's going to be a horizontal, and because it's between 0 and 1, that's also a stretch in the horizontal direction. Stretch by 1/2. And then the last thing it does is it flips because of the negative sign out front. Okay? So that's all of our transformations we're going to talk about for now.